That's right, everybody. The greatest show on dirt. For anybody who's ever been to a World of Outlaw race and sat in the stands, it's almost impossible to not think to yourself, what would it take to field a team financially? I think every little kid after attending Knoxville or any of the major races walks away wanting to think about strapping themselves into a 410 sprint car. For this week's video, we're going to sit down and we're going to look at what it would take to run the 2021 schedule with the World of Outlaws. All 22 states, all 90 races. Coming at you now, let's go ahead and jump over to an Excel spreadsheet and we'll start diving through the expenses of what it takes to run with the Outlaws. As you can see, the new calendar has been published for 2021, 22 different states this year, over 90 different races that these Outlaws are going to run. For the basis of all our calculations, we'll be using 90 races as our estimate, as well as the payouts that were published on the World of Outlaws website. For 2021, there will be 6 Crown Jewel events that can each pay up to $100,000, or the Knoxville Nationals up to $200,000. And then the weekly show purse is up to $10,000 this year at each of the events. So now that we know all those figures and those calculations, let's go ahead and jump into Excel and start doing the calculations to understand what it takes to run with the Outlaws. Okay, so as you can see, I put together a very simple Excel spreadsheet to walk you through what the capital outlays would be to start your team. The first expense is obviously the truck and trailer combo. For anybody that's been to the racetrack, you guys understand that these guys travel in style. From the largest race teams in their 53-foot haulers to the local guy who's trying to make it happen, all of these guys travel in style. These rigs are basically mobile homes. They sleep in them, they live in them, and obviously they have to be their mobile workstation as well. The rear end of these rigs generally carry 2 cars, and then obviously on the inside of the facility, they have the ability to sleep for a couple of nights. The highest rigs are probably about $750,000. The lower rigs are about $250 to $350. For the sake of our example today, $350 is the price we're going to use. The next major expense is going to be your actual race cars. Now again, depending upon the size of the team and the sponsors that they're able to draw, a majority of the Outlaw teams are going to have at a minimum 3 chassis, but more than likely they're probably going to have up to 6 cars. They'll take a couple of them on the road with them, and then they'll also have a couple back in the shop as spares. For the sake of today's example, a full roller is going to cost between $25,000 and $30,000. For today's estimate, we've used $28,000, and we're going to assume that each race team has 3 cars for a total value of $84,000. With each of those 3 cars, team's probably going to have an engine per car as well, maybe even more. Again, for the basis of our example today, we're going to assume that each team has 3 410 motors to go with their chassis. Now again, every team's a little bit different. Some teams may carry more. To give you an example of what one of these 410s cost, here's a couple of examples I was able to find online. For the guys that are running the Outlaw series, these guys are running super hot motors, anywhere from $55,000 to $75,000 per engine. The last couple of items the teams are going to need are obviously a mule or a side-by-side in order to push these cars in and out of the trailer and to get them started on the track. At the tail end of it, I've added in some miscellaneous expenses. Again, these guys live on the road. In order to completely outfit their haulers, they need to make sure that they've got a mobile garage on the road, so I've given a $25,000 budget for that. As you can see, in order to capitalize one of these teams and to get yourself ready to go for the year, it's going to be about $674,000. And again, I think some of the bigger teams have a lot more money tied up in it than this. Now that we've covered all of the expenses that it takes to actually get into racing, we're going to next cover all of the operational expenses that it takes to get around the country, to field a team every single night, to continually put a car on the track and maintain a level of competitiveness. Again, the operating expenses to these hot rods is extremely high, whether it be the tires, the race fuel, the pit passes, the rebuilds on the motors, the occasional accidents. All of those things add up, especially when you're running 90 races throughout the year. Let's jump back into the spreadsheet and we'll cover those operational expenses now. Once you've bought your car, you better have deep pockets if you're going to make it through an entire race season. When you start looking at some of these expenses, you can understand just how challenging it is to make it through a World of Outlaw seasons. One of the major expenses that a lot of people probably don't consider is the amount of tires that a sprint car has to go through in order to make it through a full year. A sprint car is heavily dependent upon the sizing of the tires as well as the compound in order to get it around the track. Sometimes big teams, they might go through multiple tires a night in order to find the right stagger to allow them to have the fastest lap times. For the sake of our discussion, I found a website here just to give you an example of all of the different tire types and what the average costs are in order for these teams to buy the equipment they need to race. For the sake of our discussion, we're going to guess, or we're going to assume that every tire is about $215, and we're going to make the assumption that a team would run through 2 tires a night. In all reality, some of the teams might actually go through even more tires. It's heavily dependent upon how well you qualify and whether or not you're able to get yourself directly into the show after qualifying. As you can see from the breakdown, we're accounting for $430 per race for tires, and again, when we look at the overall season, we're looking at 90 races in a year, so that's an annual expense of $38,700. The next major expense is going to put in the actual race fuel in these vehicles. Again, a traditional fuel cell on a sprint car is between 22 and 28 gallons. A lot of these guys, again, by the time that you go through hot laps, qualifying, your individual heats, and whether you make the A or the B feature, you can burn through quite a bit of fuel. For the sake of our estimate today, 40 gallons at 5 gallons, $200 a night, $18,000 for a 90 race season. Another expense that often get overlooked is the pit passes. For the sake of our example, I assume that every driver would have 3 crew members at each of the races in order to help them prepare the car, load the car, set the car up, all of those things. We assumed $35 per head, 3 guys a night. That's $105 per races and about $9,450 across the 90 race season. One of the other things are all of the oil changes. Again, these are very high dollar, high performance race engines. These guys are continually dropping the oil out of them just to make sure that there's no damage done and to make sure that they got the right lubrication to keep these things running tip top. That's about $60 a race and about $5,400 across the 90 race season. One of the other and more challenging things to forecast is really the mileage that goes into actually running this series and getting these rigs from track to track. Again, for the 21 schedule, there's going to be 22 different states that the World of Outlaws are going to visit. One of the nice things that the promoters do is they actually schedule the races in a fairly nice sequence to really limit the amount of travel that these teams have to do. For the sake of our example, we have assumed that they're going to do roughly 300 miles per show. Again, these rigs are going to get about 3 to 5 miles per gallon. For the sake of our math, we assume 5 miles per gallon at $3.25 a gallon. That's $195 per race. And again, annualized for the entire season, $17,550 in just fuel. Now, there's other expenses that could be included on this list to truly get to the operating cost for the season. Some of the things that I haven't included are the wages that are paid to the staff. I don't have the experience to know how that is handled. If you guys have worked for a team or have a better understanding, please write that down in the comments. I'd love to know. Obviously, there's the driver expense. A lot of these guys are probably rewarded based on what they're able to win in a show. But again, I don't have the experience there to give you a good answer, so I've left that out. And then the last one is the hotel expense. A lot of the bigger teams that are driving the 53-foot trailers, those don't really have sleeping quarters inside of them. So a lot of the times you'll see these rigs parked at major hotels. So you would also have to think about that as well. For the sake of our example, I kind of try to think about it as a budget racer. What would you have to do in order to make it onto the series? What would be the minimum operating cost that you should expect? I think this directionally is a fairly good estimate. The other part of it is obviously the reserves. And when we think about the reserves, those are the things that are going to be spent throughout the year at periodic times, sometimes unexpected and sometimes planned. From a miscellaneous emergency example, every once in a while you roll one of these down the front stretch or the back stretch and cause a bunch of damage, tear the car in half, and obviously have to sit down and rebuild the thing from top to bottom. From a motor rebuild perspective, these engines, these 410 motors, making 850 to 950 horsepower, they require a significant amount of maintenance in order to make sure that they're running in tip-top shape. The bigger teams, they're getting these motors rebuilt probably on a basis of anywhere from every 10 to 15 races to make sure that they're in peak operating condition. To do a full-blown motor rebuild with some dyno time and any testing that may be required, I think a fairly conservative estimate is between $10,000 to $15,000 if nothing in the motor is damaged. So for the sake of our argument, we're saying about $15,000 for a motor rebuild. And again, over a 19 race season, assuming they're getting it rebuilt every 15 races, that's a $90,000 expense just for motor rebuilds. So to look at the overall operating expense, about $287,000 a year in order to get one of these cars around the series and to truly field a team to run with the Outlaws. So in summary, to go from your weekly racing schedule into traveling with the Outlaws in order to get the equipment to compete, at a minimum, you're probably going to have a $650,000 investment. And then on the upper end of that scale, probably get close to $1 million. Once you have all of your equipment, you can probably expect to spend about $275,000 to $350,000 a year in order to travel with the Outlaws and to put a competitive car on the back of the field each week. Running with the best of the best each week is obviously a very expensive endeavor. It's something that not many of us are going to be able to do. But again, I think what I want you to take away from this video is the blood, sweat, and tears that these teams put into making this a reality for each of us every single year to go and participate and to watch and enjoy the sport of racing. I think it speaks volume to the overall sponsorship, the promotership, and how important of a role we play as a spectator to make sure that these guys are getting the fans and the audiences that they need to keep this sport alive. I think if you were to speak any of the racers and you ask them the price of racing, the obvious answer is it's going to be priceless because there's nothing else like strapping into a race car.